My name is Jesse Kimpinski Checkers, and I will tell you the story of my father, Bob Kimpinski, of what I remember. I couldn't say that the dates are right on, but give or take a year or two is best that I can remember at this late date. When I say late date, it's like 91 plus. Phew, them years had gone by fast, and this is taped July 11, 2007. I guess I'm the last of the clan now. Of course, there are Lucy and Lena younger than I, but I don't think they could remember even half of what I do. So here goes. Bob Kempinski, that's my father. Whom I'm talking about. He and the family came to Canada from Austria in 1900 or 1901. That's Dad, Mother, and brother Nick, or Nicola, as he was born in Austria, and the rest of the family born in Canada. Your Baba, Mary, or Mother depends on who is listening to the tape. Mary, Mike, Stanley, Annie, John, Jesse, that's me, Lucy, and Lena. 9 children in all. There was an agent from Canada in Austria to recruit people to come to Canada to open up the country and to clear the land. They were given so many acres, which was called the homestead. I don't know exactly how many acres they were promised, perhaps 30 or so. They had to pay a very small price for the extra acres. But the stipulation they had to build a dwelling of some sort and clear so many acres of land before they could get a deed for this homestead. They knew someone in northern Manitoba that had come to Canada from their village. So, of course, that's where they wanted to go. It was only a very small place named Horod where they landed, or that these people lived, named Trutch. I don't know how long they lived with them, perhaps a few months or till their place was mapped out, and she was very mean woman to my mother. She tried to make some discord between my parents so that my father would be mad and perhaps hit his wife. She would put a hot pail of water on the floor or lead off the stove, so when Nicola was creeping around on the floor, he would get burnt. Well, anyway, she met her dues. She was crushed between a couple of her cows when they bunched together, and she died short time later. My mother was very afraid of the bears, as it was all wilderness, and people met one occasionally. There were no fences to keep the cows in, and they had a cowbell on their neck, and when they wanted to bring them in for milking, they had to go looking for them and listening where the cowbell sound came from. And sometimes they just came home by themselves, as some cows get used to being milked to a certain time, and they come home themselves. One day this happened when the men were away making a few dollars. They had to go the distance, maybe 15 or 20 or even 30 miles on foot to find work, and they would stay for a few days before coming back home. It depends on the job. Well, this day the cows didn't come home, and they looked and listened for the cowbell, but they could not hear the bell. Now in this dwelling, our house was supposed to be where they lived, there was an attic that you could climb only from the outside. on the ladder. So they heard something coming through the bush, and was lots of bush more than not. Anyway, they thought it was a bear. They thought they could climb up to the attic, as they were always alert in case a bear did come. Well, Mother took Nick and climbed up into the attic. Then Mother hardly had her foot over the little door, and the other woman was up halfway when the ladder broke. She fell, of course, and the ladder too, and it was only the cow coming out of the bush. Now there was Mother up in the attic with a kid and no ladder. I don't know how she got down, but it wouldn't have been a very high dwelling, so the ladder would be maybe 7 or 8 feet. Anyway, I don't remember the story. Dad sold the homestead place to my mother's sister and her husband, Aunt Antoshka and Uncle Bill Kotutski, and bought a farm near Strathclair, about 25 miles away to the south, and a better farming land and better schools, he thought. But it was short-lived, as he found out that there were 3 other mortgages against the farm, which would have made it pretty expensive if he had to pay them off. So I think we lived on that farm about 3 years when he was forced off by the creditors. As it seemed, the lawyers at that time didn't find out as they do today what is owed against the property. He called a search, I believe. One of the reasons, too, he trusted everyone and didn't know enough English himself, only through an interpreter who was not much versed in English himself. So he looked around to buy another farm, and he had to be off the farm by a certain date. In other words, forced off the farm. There was a man living in Strathclair, pretty well off, a Mr. McIntyre. He had several farms, as it seemed that was his business, real estate. So Dad bought a farm from him. But first, we moved from this Strathclair farm to this abandoned farmhouse and lived there for about a year, because the farm that he bought from Mr. McIntyre was only land, no buildings on it. So of course Dad didn't have that kind of money to build a barn or a house. But of course Mr. McIntyre had lots of money. So in buying the farm, the agreement was that he would build a house and barn, and Dad had to give him collateral or mortgage on all the cattle and horses he had, plus the first 2 years of grain that he would grow. It would be his too, and he put insurance on everything, on the house and barn and the cattle too, which he was well secured. But it seemed Dad was destined to lose again, the way it turned out to be. The grain he harvested was quite abundant that year, but he only got a small amount of it, perhaps enough for the next year's seed, and the rest belonged to Mr. McIntyre, as was the agreement. And the second year was the same. Mr. McIntyre got the bulk of the grain. I remember them hauling it to the grain elevator at Ipswich. I guess Dad thought, the third year of grain would belong to him. But about the middle of November of the second year, it snowed early in November. This happened on a Saturday night to Sunday morning. Mike and Stanley, my brothers, they were young men, and went to Strathclair Saturday night. They told John and Annie to be sure and put the horses in the barn, as they were running loose that day. And usually it was no problem to get them in, to go if you showed them some oats in the pail or something. But not this day. They just came to the door and away they would gallop. This happened several times and finally got them coaxed to come in and had them tied in their stalls. And it was the same thing in trying to get the cows come in. I think 6 cows it was. Finally, they did get them in, and of course, tied them in their stalls. So those animals sensed something was about to happen, but how was anyone to know? Because next morning at about 5 a.m., the barn burnt with all the stock in it. Horses, cows, and only one horse got out when they slid the door open. But she was badly burnt and died. Another horse that was in the barn belonged to a neighbor that had come in about 11 o'clock, escaped with not a hair was singed on him. He probably got loose and escaped the flames where the fire had started. It was a known fact that Mr. McIntyre had someone go and set fire to the barn because it was well insured. All the cattle and the horses, he had insurance on them too. There was a smaller building a little further from the main big barn that housed the younger cattle and pigs and calves. That was not burned. It was devastating to lose all the horses that he only had to work on the land with. It certainly was a big blow for him. But Mr. McIntyre profited from the whole thing. He got the money when the grain was sold and for the first 2 years, and he got the insurance from the fire, and now he started pressuring Dad to pay the balance that he owed on the farm. And if he didn't come up with the money, he better find another place, because he said he had a new buyer for the farm. So since Dad didn't have the money, he had to look for another farm to rent, which he found 11 miles southwest of Shoal Lake, or 7 miles south of Killow. But he didn't buy that one. He rented it on shares. They call third bushel. For the work on the land and growing of the grain, he got 2 bushels, and the owner, his name was Jim McLean, got a third share. And now I had 4 miles to walk to school, to Reedville School. The previous school, named Green Bluff, was only 2.5 miles to walk to. It wasn't bad in the summertime, but it was pretty cold in the winter, as we didn't have the dress mode that the kids have today, like ski pants and parkas and the like. And of course, the girls didn't even wear jeans either, but the dresses or skirts, the long beige color cotton stockings. Leather shoes. You would come home from school when it was 15 or 20 below zero. It was pretty cold. I wonder sometimes how we didn't get our legs and feet frozen stiff. I think they were sometimes frozen when we had to put them in the water to thaw them out. That is really a painful thing. Well, as I said, this Jim McLean lived in Shoal Lake, and his wife happened to belong to the women's temperance movement, I think that was called, where they thought that there should not be any alcoholic drinks sold or made. But of course, her husband didn't think that way. He liked a little nip once in a while, much to her displeasure, I guess. In the summertime, I think he must have got bored, and sometimes he would get in his car and come out to the farm for a fresh air or probably a change of scenery. If it was haying time, which is about the only time he did come out, he would take the pitchfork and go out on a meadow and pick up some hay that was lost off the hay rack, or there was a windrow, just for something to do and get some exercise too. He usually had a sandwich with him or other things, but he came in the house and talked with Dad. And of course, Dad gave him not more than one shot of home brew. If he decided to stay later till almost supper time, Dad might give him another little drink too. Well, I guess she smelled it on him when he went home, so I don't know what she said to him or what conversation they must have had. But when he came another day and Dad had given him a drink and he just put the bottle back in the cupboard, he seen that and said, you know, Bob, perhaps you should hide that in case some police would come. Of course, Dad didn't think too much about that, as he thought, why would the police come? He didn't sell it, as a lot of people in them times did. They made a home brew and sold it in town to whoever would buy it. Some was sold to the Indians, and that's when hell would break loose. They got drunk and got into a lot of trouble. So as I said, Dad didn't think too much about what he said to hide it. Of course, he too did not know that Jim's wife was dead against alcohol. So just a day or two later, it was early in the morning, they had just finished milking and coming to the house with the milk pails when the RCMP came, and I saw them coming towards the house with Dad and Mother. I knew where the bottle was, and I grabbed it and ran out the back door as they were coming in the front door. I ran towards the creek with it, and I seen an old stump off a tree, and I hit the darn bottle with all my might to break it, and still it wouldn't break. So I just flung it as far as I could, hoping it would fly into the creek. But it didn't go that far either. Well, anyway, when the police came in, they probably were used to this kind of stuff before. There was kind of a little pantry under the stairs to the second floor, and that's where Mom had a crock sitting with once boiled stuff that the alcohol was extracted, but she had put more sugar into it, and it was there to ferment for another batch. Oh, he said, this looks interesting, and took the cover off it, and of course there was no doubt what it was. He had a little jar filled, about a pint. He said, that's all I want, and off they went. Well, of course, Dad had a trial to prove he made home brew, and I think he got 60 days jail, but was home after serving about 30 or 40 days, as he paid the rest in fine, which was very hard to get the money for. They must have sold a calf or a pig or something to get the money to pay the fine. And after the police had gone, I went and found the bottle that I threw away. It's a good thing it didn't break. Them days, there were so many people caught making homebrew, and so many different stories when they had the court trials. Some were very tricky, like the man that hired a lawyer to represent him at the trial. The lawyer asked the policeman, how did he know that it was homebrew or whiskey? Well, he said, it looks like it, which there was about a third of a bottle. Well, he said, you can't tell by looking at it. Then he asked them, did you taste it? The policeman said no. No, the policeman said. He said to the judge, do you want to taste it? And the judge said no, he didn't want to taste it. Well, the lawyer said, "Do you mind if I taste it?" The judge said, "Well, no, I guess it's all right." So the lawyer drained the whole darn thing. He wiped his mouth and said, "Nah, that's only water." He drank the proof, so he could not be charged with making home brew. Smart lawyer, eh? I wonder how he got home, or if the guy whose brew it was carried him home. Well, Dad didn't get away with that easy. Dad stayed on the farm for about 4 years, I think, on Jim's place. The farm itself was not bad, but he wanted to raise more cattle, and there was not enough pasture, as there was quite a bit of bush on the pasture, and only a small part of it was grass where the cattle could feed. So it was bad. In the springtime of the year, we would let the cattle roam over the fields and all over, going from one meadow to the other, grabbing the early green grass. But of course, they could only be there till they were working on the land. And then they were driven into the pasture where there was a fence to keep them in. When they were out rambling, I had to take them off. I had to take time off from school, and be it a week or even more or whatever, and herd them, or just to stay with them a good part of the day until they were full. Then I would chase them back home and put them in the pasture. I had a mouth organ with me while I played it a bit and learned to play it. I didn't know how to yodel yet, which I learned later when I was doing the cultivating and desking on the land. So, as I was saying, he wanted a farm with more grazing land on it, which he found only 5 miles from Shoal Lake. A man by the name of Geb McDonald owned it. I think it was in the spring of 1929 that he moved from McLean's place, 11 miles southwest of Shoal Lake, to McDonald's place, 5 miles southeast of Shoal Lake. That's when I quit going to school, as it was 5 miles to walk now, but I was needed to help on the farm, never mind the schooling. When we lived at McLean's place, Lucy and Lena stayed at Nick's place for a while to go to school. But Dad bought a horse, an old mare, so Lena and Lucy drove to Shoal Lake School. There was a lot of land for the pasture here at McDonald's place, almost a whole quarter of land, 160 acres. So we had more cattle there now, and if a cow had a calf, it was harder to get her home with a newborn calf, as we kept the calves in the barn away from the cows, because the cows were milked so we could get the cream to sell. A couple of different times, I put a newborn calf over my shoulders and carried it home from the pasture. They were heavy enough, but not as big as some of the calves we raised where I'm living now. Perhaps 60 pounds or so. But if something had to be done or lifted regardless, I remember carrying 100 pounds of bags of flour up a flight of stairs when Dad took the wheat to the flour mill and usually brought home 9 or 10 bags of flour. So John and I carried them all up to the room upstairs in the house. He took one and then I took one, so it wasn't left for him to carry all of them. Dad put them on our backs off the wagon. It's a wonder we didn't get a hernia. Dad couldn't carry them up a flight of stairs as he did have a hernia. So by this time, Sister Annie was married and lived near Rossburn. And then in 1933 or 34, Stanley got married and went away. Of course, the others like Mary, Nick, Mike were married and away. the family were getting smaller at home. Annie and Joe left the farm and went to Nipawa to live. He worked at the salt plant, and Annie worked for Swift Meats, and then she worked at the air base during the war years. John decided to go closer to Nipawa too on a farm and get married. So Dad and Mother lived with him for a while, and then he got them a house right in Nipawa. I don't think they were very happy to leave the farm living, but John now had a wife and didn't think it was right to live together. But in a short time they met other people in town, so I think they liked it. But Dad died in 1946, I think, after a short illness. He was partly blind with cataracts for a few years. Annie and Joy lived in Nipawa for a few years and then decided to move to BC, where a good friend of theirs had gone and kept in touch with them and told them about a job there. Anyways, when they did go to BC, Joe worked in the sawmill, I think, for a while, and then he bought land or lots and built a home, lived in it for a few years, and then sell and build another one, and do the same thing in different houses and sell it. He also bought a 6-class apartment, fixed it up, what needed doing, and resell. He worked at different places carpentering. Lucy was married and lived in Nipawa too, but her husband died of cancer, and she was left with 4 small children and a workshop that her husband had, where he did welding and fixing farmers' machinery and other things. He also was called to the salt plant when there was some welding to do. She put in an ad in the paper to sell the place, and she moved to BC after she sold the shop. And Mother moved with them too. First she stayed at Lucy's place, and then she went to Annie's place and lived at Annie's until she got a stroke and failed health and died after a short time. So if you wanted to know how many farms, it's 9 places he lived before he died. It was first it was hard when they came to Canada, and then he sold and moved to Strathclair, Brooks's place, lost that one, then moved to an abandoned Brooks's house until the buildings were erected on McIntyre's place, where the barn burned, then Show Lake, McLean's place southwest of Show Lake, and then McDonald's place southeast of Show Lake, and then to Nipawa on the farm, and then from Nipawa to town. I couldn't tell you too much about the family's history back in Austria, only just a few things what I remember them talking from time to time or just reminiscing. On my father's side, the Kimpinski, he had 1 brother named Mike and 1 sister named Palavna. I would say maybe Pearl in English if one wants to translate. They lived in the same village that my mother did. Her father's name was Frank Lashuta. He delivered mail from larger places to the smaller post office, as I could make out. The larger post office was named Wushaten, and they were delivered to Lehowitz, another post office, where he was away for several days. My mother was only 9 years old when her mother died from eating poisoned mushrooms, as did her grandmother too, from eating the same batch of mushrooms. Now he was left with 4 kids under 9 years old. My mother was the eldest. So I imagine it was pretty difficult for him to look after a family of four if he wanted to keep his job. So he got married very shortly after, as I guess was the custom at that time in that situation like that. According to Mother, it was something like a Cinderella story. Mother took the brunt of punishment because she was the oldest and was beaten quite often when her father was away. But on the day he came home, she says they were all cleaned up to make it look like a happy household. And then start the same thing over as soon as he was gone. She said Uncle Alexa, he was mistreated too, as he was the youngest, and very mischievous. I guess he didn't change too much even when he came to Canada. They lived in Detroit until they were forced to go back to Canada. I wonder if his early days, like a mean stepmother, had some bearings on how he turned out, as I think that he didn't treat his wives, either one of them, as nice as he should have. God rest his soul. Mike, Eunice Lashuta is, I think, about the last surviving of the family. Every time my mother used to tell us about the beatings and hair pulling, I would think of the sad song I once heard on the record some 70 years ago or so. Something like this. To tam chodzi brodet po moim grobie, o ja Marusuniu, weźmit mnie so. O не можу тя серце до себе приймете, мусиш ти додому головку си змить. Ой, ще ж ми, мачуха, голови не умила, як за кожний волос кров'ю не пустила. Mother's brothers came to Canada within a few years after they did and settled on the farms around the area where Dad and Mother did, near Elphinstone and Horde, except Alexa. He moved closer to Strathclyde and was only about 1.5 miles from where we lived on Brooks's place, when Dad sold the homestead. My uncles or mother's brothers' name were Hiko Lashuta and Alexa Lashuta, and her half-brother name was Mike Lashuta and John Lashuta. John, he came to Canada a bit later and only stayed in Canada about 2 or 3 years at the most. He went back. He was lonesome for his wife and a couple of kids he had. We never seen him again. Mother had 3 sisters, Antoshka, that was married to Bill Kutulski, that bought our homestead, and 2 half-sisters in Austria. We never seen them either. They wrote letters to Mother. When Mother had letters to write back to them, it was your grandfather or Joe Walsh that did the writing, as Dad or Mother had no education. In fact, it was mostly Joe Walsh that did the translating for my father when he bought the farms too. I couldn't tell you, no, wait a minute. He wasn't that good at English either at that time, but certainly much better by far than Dad was. So he had to have somebody talking for him. Uh, Life on the farm was pretty hard in many ways, mostly because there was no money for the barest necessities. But looking back now, I can say that the experience I treasure and people were content with much less than they would be today. Yeah, that is, you can see that all around. I'll tell you a few little funny things that happened along the way. When we moved to Brooks's place from the homestead, of course, I was only 4 years old, but then after Mary was married shortly after, or your mother, they lived only about, less than 2 miles away from our place. It's a funny thing, I used to go right through the bush and across the railway tracks to her place. And one day I went, she was telling Mother that they had no eggs, the chickens weren't laying. So I went to the chicken house and picked up a few eggs, put them in my pocket, and I was going to take them over to Mary's place. Well, of course, there was the fence along the railway track there that I had to climb under. So, there wasn't much of the eggs left whole, I, I don't think she made scrambled eggs. I don't know what happened there, but I remember that the eggs were all smashed when I went under that gate. There was another incident that's kind of funny too. When we lived in McIntyre's place, this was in the winter time, and Mother wasn't feeling too good. So, of course, in the Ukrainian or Polish, if you're not feeling good, well, the sauna would be the best. Like if you were a Finlander, you'd build a steam bath, but of course, they did the best they could. So anyway, there was a big copper boiler on the stove, and got the water and put it into this 40-gallon barrel. And she was going to have this sauna in there, take a bath, make her feel better. I don't know if it did or not. But anyway, they waited until all the kids were gone to bed, and Dad was up with her, I guess he had to help her into the barrel. I guess they put more than half a barrel of water, and she would sit in the water and then throw a blanket over it, just like a steam bath. Anyway, this, they no sooner had done this here, she was in the barrel of this for a little while, and there was a knock at the door. And there was the guy that knew Dad, and he was going from someplace, I don't know, he thought he'd step in and just visit. So, of course, Dad asked him in the house, he had a big fur coat on, Well, Mother was in the barrel there, and of course she had the blanket over the barrel, some kind of a sheet or something. Well, he took his fur coat off and threw it on the barrel too, with Mother in there. I think she darn near suffocated. But anyway, Dad was happy to see him and talking about old times, and so he forgot about his wife in the barrel. So anyway, Brother Nick came downstairs. He said, Dad, why are you having your company in there? Why don't you take him to the other room there, to the living room there? And the guy looked at, he said, oh my gosh, he said, I'm way past my time. He said, I better get going. I said, I thought that I would just stop for just a moment, and here, I don't know how long they were talking, but anyway, poor Mother, she pretty near had it. there were lots of little incidents, you know. Can't remember them all. But to fill up this tape, I guess you'll be tired of listening to it anyway. Oh, maybe that's kind of, I think that gives you a bit of knowledge anyway. Uh, I guess I shouldn't have played the music, but I did. You know, I wanted something to fill up the tape. But I didn't want to because my other big recorder went on the bum, so I only used a little one, and it's not very good, make too much noise. But here's something you might be interested in. Dad Kimpinski, born August 24, 1874, and he died September 5th, 1945. My mother was born August 16, 1880, and died July 18, 1964. Nick, born December 4th, 1901, he died July 19, 93. So he was only 5 months old when they came to Canada, as to what Mother always said. 20 weeks, well, 20 weeks would be about 5 months, I guess. Mike, Mary, born February 2nd, 1904, died February 18, 1977. That's what I have in this sheet that I have here. Maybe it's different, I don't know. Mike, born July 31, 1906, died June 2nd, 1976. Stanley, born October 22nd, 1909, and I have no record what date exactly did he died. Annie was born September 8, 1911, died July 1984. And John, born December 24, 1914, died February 18, 69. That's me, born 1916, still going at this age of 91. Lucy, born March 16, 1919, still living as of this date. She has a bad arthritis and is suffering with this bad arthritis that went into her back and neck and everywhere. I never could think of its name. Lena, born September 21, 1922, still living in BC as of this date, and I keep in touch with her quite regular, and also with Lucy too. I wanted to fill the tape. Looks like I haven't got enough stuff to fill the tape unless I tell you a joke or two. Well, here's one. Maybe you didn't hear this one before. The forest. Gump lived in the forest and he died and of course went to heaven. St. Peter met him at the gate and said, "Oh, we've been expecting you, Mr. Gump, but now It's filling up so fast, and he said you'll have to answer 3 questions before you can enter. Oh, the gum said, well, that's okay. Just give me the questions. I want to get there so fast, fast, fast. So he said, well, okay, the first question is, how many days in a week starts with a T? He thought for a moment. He said, well, today and tomorrow starts with a T. Well, St. Peter's, well, that's not what I had in mind, but I'll let you go. Then he said, how many seconds is there in a year? Well, he thought for a moment. He said, well, there's 12 seconds in a year. He said, how do you mean 12 seconds? He said, well, January 2nd, February 2nd, March 2nd, April 2nd, so on. Every 12 months, every have seconds. Well, so I guess St. Peter was stumped again. Well, he said, one more question for you. He said, what was God's name? Oh, he said, that's easy. I took that in Sunday school. His name is Andy. Andy? Where did you get that term? Well, I learned that in Sunday school. He say, and he talks with me, and he walks with me, and he calls me his own. His name is Andy. So he had no word, but he said, run, Gump, run, you pass your exam. Now here's another one. Getting old is quite a drag. Your hair turns gray, things start to sag. A shot of Pepso, your evening snack, along with aspirin for aching back. The eyes grow bad and teeth falls out. To hear your friends, they have to shout. That's me. The bills pile up, though you worked dang hard. Now, aren't you glad you got this card? I know a couple more, but I don't think you'd want to hear them. I can't think of anything. This is an awful tape, but I'll send it to you anyway. Maybe Johnny can pick out the one he things that he like out of it. Throw the rest away. Okay, be talking to you. My wife and I live all alone in a little log hut we call our own. She loved gin and I love rum. I tell you we had a lots of fun. Ha ha ha, you and me, little brown jug, don't I love thee? Ha ha ha, you and me, little brown jug, don't I love thee? 'Tis you who make my friends my foes. 'Tis you who make me wear old clothes. Here you are so near my nose. Tip her up and down she goes. Ha ha ha, you and me, little brown jug, how I love thee. Ha ha ha, you and me, little brown jug, how I love thee. When the rose is red, my nose is too. Violets blue, and so are you. Yet I guess before I stop, I better take another drop. Ha ha ha, you and me, little brown jug, how I love thee. Ha ha ha, you and me, little brown jug, how I love thee. In the middle of the night. Well, anyway, he was yelling to me to get the bowl, to get it from under him. Here he was sitting in the bowl with his feet up in the air, and there wasn't much space in there. Was only about 18 inches of space between the bed and the dresser there. So anyway, he yelled at me because he was sitting in the bowl, he said. Well, then I realized what he was doing. So I went and finally pulled him by the legs and pulled him out from their bowl and all, and got the bowl. Now, that's not a joke, but this is a true story. Here's something that I got the other day. It's the latest tactics by car thieves. Heads up, everyone. Keep this circulating. You walk across the parking lot, unlock your car, and get inside. You start the engine and shift into reverse when you look into the rear view mirror to back out your parking space. You notice a piece of paper stuck in the middle of the rear window. So you shift into park, unlock your doors, and jump out of the car to remove that paper or whatever it is that is obstructing your view. When you reach the back of your car, that is when the carjackers appear out of nowhere, jump into your car, and take off. They practically mow you down as they speed up in your car. And guess what, ladies? I'll bet your purse is still in the car. So now the carjackers has your car, your home address, your money, and your keys. Your home and your whole identity are now compromised. Beware of this new scheme that is now being used. If you see a piece of paper stuck to the back of your window, just drive away. Remove the paper later and be thankful that you read this email. I hope you will forward this to your friends and family, especially to women. A purse contains all kinds of personal information and identification documents, and you certainly do not want this to fall into the wrong hands. What do you think of that? When I was young, I used to wait on Grandpa and hand him a plate. Pass down the bottle when he got dry and brush away the blue-tail fly. Then after dinner Grandpa would sleep. He bade me then a vigil keep. And when he went to shut his eye, he said, "You watch the blue-tail fly." Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. Jimmy crack corn, I don't care. My grandpa's gone away. And when he rode in the afternoon, I followed along with a hickory broom. The pony he would always shy when bitten by a blue-tail fly. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. My grandpa's gone away. One day he rode around the farm. The flies so numerous they did swarm. One chance to bit him on the thigh. The devil take the blue-tail fly. The pony runs, he jumps and pitch. He threw the old man in the ditch. He died and the jury wondered why. The verdict was the blue-tail fly. They laid him beneath the cinnamon tree. His epitaph is there to see. Beneath this stone I'm forced to lie, a victim of the blue-tail fly. The old man's gone, now let him rest. They say all things is for the best. I'll never forget till the day I die Oh, Grandpa and the blue-tailed fly, Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. My grandpa's gone away. Сонце сходить, вітерець повіває, сіла чайка на дубочок, на скрипичку грає. Там при долині, ой, тремтне толоті, там ще напевало разом тремоло. Там ще напевало разом тремоло. Один напився, на сопілку грає, а другий напився, перед ним гуляє. А другий напився, перед ним гуляє. А третій не п'є, не гуляє, сидить конець стола, та й думку думай. Ой, чо ти сидиш, не гуляєш, сидиш конець стола, та й думку думаєш. Сидиш конець стола, та й думку думай. Як мене сидіти, думки не думати, може я дівчину не можу їй взяти. А же я дівчину не можу їй взяти. Вороги, вороженьки, вороги, вороненьки, не кажуть не ходити, дівчину любить. Кажуть не ходити, дівчину любить. А чужині загибаю, марно життя йде. За родином поглядаю, а де ж вона де? Ти, мій Боже милосливий, дай же мені слів, най почую ще